Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on these two worm buckets that have the African night crawlers living in them. The systems have now reached 124 days of age, and it was not too long ago, two check-ins ago, when the systems had reached 100 days of age, that we brought an end to a little set it and forget it test. And we did the set it and forget it test over here in bucket number 2. Bucket number 2 is the one we're going to check next. Bucket number 1 is the one we're going to begin with. As you saw, the label on this one is bucket number 1. And bucket number 1 has now been fed 12 times. During the set it and forget it test, we didn't feed bucket number 2, so they've only been fed 8 times so far. And there's always going to be that discrepancy of 4 feedings. And I'm not really too worried about it. I guess the main gist of the set it and forget it test was that we really stocked bucket number 2 full of a whole bunch of materials, almost up to the rim, pretty much up to the rim, in order to make sure that they've got ample material to live in. And then we left them to be for a period of 7 weeks. And then when we came back in here 24 days ago, that was 2 check-ins ago, to finally bring them back into the routine of getting periodic check-ins and feedings, we gave them some yummy cantaloupe melon. And we came back in here 12 days ago. The feeding was a little bit more vegetable centric, so they got stuff like tomatoes and some asparagus. I can see some of it right here. They do seem to like it. Asparagus is pretty dense, so when it gets all mushy like this in the middle, you could tell that it's probably not mushy vegetable matter anymore. It's probably just a bunch of worms hanging out inside that piece of asparagus. The tomatoes that they would have been given are tomatoes that would have come out of my garden when I pulled all the fruit off all my plants out there prior to the first frost arriving. We did do a kind of a deep dive in the last check-in here, so we did our best to till up the material in these systems by attempting to probe almost all the way down to the bottom. I do believe we did reach bottom on a couple occasions, and it did seem like we did do a nice job stirring up some of the stuff that was down low. When we stirred up bucket number 1 here, we did sort of get that sense that the material in the system was perhaps a little bit more damp and gooey and muddy than it needs to be. But that's okay. Oh yeah, I remember this. Not both systems got a lime. Only bucket number 1 got a lime. And it was frozen, so I couldn't do much. I could have, possibly split it in half and given bucket number 2 half of it if it had not been frozen solid. But I don't know. What do you think? Should we take half of it so that bucket number 2 can also have a little bit of yummy lime? I think I will just set a little chunk of it aside. Actually, take the bigger chunk. We'll take the bigger chunk and we'll set it aside and include it in part of the feeding when we get over to bucket number 2. You can see the stuff I'm giving them today is some peaches that went really bad. Right down to the core. I've removed the pits, and then over here we've got some chopped up apple, possibly pear. I'm not sure. I got it from my mom, but this stuff I suppose also sat around long enough that it was decided to no longer be used as human food anymore. Last time we plopped in a little bit of surplus bedding too. When we did the set it and forget it test, we loaded up bucket number 2 with lots and lots of leaves. And over the entire period of set it and forget it over in bucket number 2, the only bedding we used here in bucket number 1 was leaves. So I believe that as a result of that, we're going to see a good number of leaf stems lingering around as leftovers in both systems for a while, until those leaf stems have a chance to break down some. So to try to break the monotony of leaves only as bedding for so long, I came in last week, or last time, 12 days ago, with some of my prepared bedding, which I replenished yesterday, so I thought we would come back in here with a little bit more once again today. We gave both systems a little shot of supplementary bedding. Although in bucket number 2, since it seemed like we were a little bit cramped for space, and since there was so much of the leafy matter still remaining in there, we left not left, but we provided them with just a little bit less than we did over here in bucket number 1. We might do the same again here today. Both systems will get some of my prepared bedding, but perhaps not so much over in bucket number 2, just to see if we can try to help bucket number 1 catch up as far as overall material in the system. So I've got my worm chow here too. I thought maybe we can dress up this bedding down here with a little bit of worm chow introduced down into it, so it's not going to be just bedding over here. It's going to be bedding with some yummy food mixed into it. It's a worm chow which consists of mainly pumpkin seed ground down to a really nice fine consistency. Also some noodles, but not noodles that were prepared from wheat or flour, but rather from vegetable matter. So the worm chow on this go around is a little bit different from what I've had in the past. So let's get in here with perhaps half of this apple pear, whatever this is. Sometimes by the time it starts to thaw out, I'm able to identify it based on its scent. That could very well be pear. And then one of these 2 peaches, which is so fragile I could barely handle it without it wanting to just fall apart in my hands. And then what we leave behind here is going to be the portion that we give to bucket number 2. I also have a little bit of my pulverized eggshell supply here, which can go in as grit. Last time we intended to give both systems a little shot of grit, and we forgot to do so here in bucket number 1. So we did sort of put a little placeholder reminder out there in the video saying, hey, maybe next time we'll remember to apply stuff to both systems, not just one, when we come out here prepared to give both systems something. And I think that gets us to the finish line over here in bucket number 1. Today I didn't think we would probe as deep as we did last time, but probing down deep last time was pretty interesting to bring up some of the more sticky, muddy stuff that was down low, but at the same time also stir in some loose, leafy matter from up high, and at the same time introduce possibly a little bit of extra moisture, airflow, oxygen basically, down into the lower reaches of the system. Sometimes I worry a system that doesn't really get any agitation whatsoever. I worry a little bit that maybe there's not sufficient air or oxygen content in the material down there, so it felt good to be able to kind of go through and not only inspect this stuff out of curiosity, but also to inject a little extra air down into the lower end of the bin. So let's move on to bucket number 2 and take care of getting them fed. So bring up bucket number 2 over here to center stage. And down here in bucket number 2, I know I'm going to be a little bit more cramped for space than I was in bucket number 1. You might already be able to tell just from the level. I mean, I showed the level in the very beginning how much more material is in here. And that was done intentionally on day 51 when we started the set it and forget it test. By loading the system up to the brim, to the rim, to the brim, with leaves. So it was kind of interesting to see how the level had dropped considerably. Now that we've been back in here a couple times since the end of the set it and forget it test, we have supplemented the bedding on a couple occasions. So we're certainly not neglecting the need for fresh bedding. I'm not even so sure if there's really a need per se. Because it does seem to me somehow that this system really did preserve a lot of its leafy matter. Didn't really all get broken down quite as much as what we noticed over in bucket number 1. And I'm still trying to formulate some sort of a, conclusion as to what that all meant, I mean, we increased the volume, so same number of worms, getting so much more real estate to roam around in. Obviously, much more material to be broken down than what was in bucket number 1. So for them to be expected to bring it all to the same state as what's over in bucket number 1, unrealistic expectations. So it's very realistic to expect what we're seeing in here as far as still lots of leftovers of that huge amount of leafy matter that had been placed in here on day 51. And we'll add a little bit of nice soft cardboard paper based prepared bedding. I mean, my prepared bedding does have a little bit of leafy matter mixed into it as well, but I use a screened version of my leaf supply which has virtually no leaf stems in it. So we'll be introducing a little bit of leafy matter too by introducing some of my prepared bedding, but no more leaf stems. So every now and then I just feel like I want to probe around a little bit deeper in this system. Last time we were unable to go very deep. I mean, no, we did go kind of deep on both edges, but we felt like we had already fluffed up everything so much on both edges that we'd not really left ourselves a lot of space so that we'd be able to probe all the way to the bottom in the center. And I believe we just sort of did the same thing again, so we're sort of robbing ourselves of the opportunity to probe all the way down to the center in the middle. But that's fine, I'm not going to worry about it. We're just going to maybe inspect the middle area a little bit, which is where the feeding was dropped in last time, 12 days ago. So perhaps we'll encounter a little bit of leftover material, perhaps a little bit of a worm party. So yeah, there's a little tomato, perhaps not even been breached yet, perhaps its skin was not punctured. Yeah, you know, I just squeezed it a little bit, and then through one little tiny hole that opened up I saw a little squirt of juice. So my guess is that that little tomato just had not been approached yet because the worm simply couldn't sense the moisture content of the object because of the unpunctured skin. So anytime I find a tomato that was placed into my system frozen, didn't have its outer skin burst yet, I try to introduce it to the worms as a viable food source by bursting it and releasing its moisture content and giving them access to the inside of the food item. Otherwise that thing, I bet, would just sit there check-in after check-in after check-in. We would just continue to see that item and the worms would continue to just pass it by, not knowing that it's yet another yummy object that they can take advantage of as a food source. So I figured maybe we'd just do one little slightly deeper probe down the middle, since that was something we didn't do a whole lot of in the last check-in. See if we can possibly take some of this more muddy stuff, at least bust it up, aerate it a little bit. Maybe next time we'll forego doing so on the outer edges and focus a little bit more on trying to go down deep in the middle, get things agitated and tilled up down the middle, which I'm sure would in the end benefit the system in the long run. So let's proceed with giving them a little bit of bedding, perhaps not so much as we piled into bucket number 1, because as I mentioned earlier, we just don't seem to have quite as much space in here as we do in bucket number 1. But we do want to give them a little bit, I believe, just like we did last time. So let's grab a handful, perhaps not a huge handful, but at least a little bit, into which we can plop today's feeding. Let's follow suit with what we did earlier, though. Let's see if we can jack up the interest in this bedding. Oops, whoa. I don't know if we need to give them that much, but, you know, let's forget about it. I thought I might be able to lift that thing out of there and put it back into the jar, but you know what? That didn't seem very likely. As soon as I touched it, the whole thing just shattered. And then now we finally get to share a little bit of lime for these guys too. That lime's going to take some time, I'm sure. We'll come back in here next time and see not a whole lot of progress, if any, on that thing. But over time, it'll become approachable and the worms will be able to take advantage of the yummy juiciness that's over there as well. But I believe in the beginning it's probably a little bit difficult for them to approach something like a chunk of citrus due to the acid content, but that'll diminish over time, and then the worms will definitely be able to move in and start taking advantage of that as yet more yummy stuff for them to break down and enjoy. So I think that pretty much brings us to the end of our check-in here with our now 124-day buckets, getting feedings number 13 and number 9. Feeding number 9 going in over here on bucket number 2, and feeding number 13 was just added over into bucket number 1. And the systems look really nice. Maybe we'll even go a little bit more generous on bedding in bucket number 1 next time. See if we can try to catch up on the level. Because there is a significant difference in the level. Not that it matters so much, but sometimes when I've got systems like this, I do like to try to keep them even Steven if I can. But, you know, can't ignore the fact that there was a significant variation in how these two systems were handled due to our set it and forget it test that we conducted not too long ago. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.